I'm a 35-year-old guy living in a small two-bedroom apartment. I work from home, so my days are usually pretty routine. But last Friday night, that routine got completely thrown out the window. It started with a call from my sister Abby. Now, I love my sister, but she can be a bit unpredictable. So when she called me out of the blue, I figured she needed a favor, but I wasn't prepared for what she was about to ask. She was frantic, talking a mile a minute, saying she needed me to babysit Jake, her 5-year-old son, for the weekend. She said she and her boyfriend Sean were going on a last-minute trip, something about needing a break, getting away for just 2 days. I hesitated. I mean, I've got a busy work schedule, and while I love Jake, he's a handful. Abby knows this, but she kept pushing, guilt-tripping me with lines like, "You never help out, and I never ask for anything." So, against my better judgment, I said yes. That same night, around 10 p.m., Abby shows up at my place with Jake. She's in a rush, as always, barely pausing to say goodbye. She shoves a small bag into my arms, no schedule, no instructions, just, here you go. When I asked where she was going, she dodged the question, muttering something about a quick getaway. Before I could press for more, she was gone. So, here I am, it's late, and I've got a 5-year-old in my living room who's asking when his mom will be back. I told him it would only be a couple of days, just the weekend, and we'd have some fun. He seemed excited, but I was already on edge. Something about the whole situation felt off. The weekend went by in a blur. Jake was great, but you know how kids are at that age, he's full of energy, jumping around, asking a million questions. By Sunday afternoon, I realized Abby hadn't even bothered to call or text to check in. I shot her a few messages, but nothing. I figured she was just enjoying her trip, so I didn't push it. Monday morning rolls around, and still no word. Now I'm starting to get uneasy. Jake is asking when his mom's coming back, and I've got no answers for him. I tried calling her again, but it went straight to voicemail. Meanwhile, I've got work piling up. I work from home and usually it's fine, but trying to juggle Zoom meetings while keeping a 5-year-old entertained is not easy. My boss noticed I was distracted during meetings, and I was already falling behind on a couple of projects. Things were getting stressful. On Tuesday, I finally got a text, but it wasn't from Abby. It was from Sean. His message was short and vague. We decided to extend the trip. No apology, no explanation, just an assumption that I would keep watching Jake. I was furious. How could they just decide to extend their trip without even asking me? But I kept it together for Jake's sake. He didn't need to see me losing it. As the days went on, Jake started to get clingier. He could tell something was off. He was restless, acting out a bit, and clearly missing his mom. I did my best to keep things normal, taking him to the park, reading him bedtime stories, but it was getting harder. The longer Abby was gone, the more trapped I felt. By the end of the week, I was starting to get suspicious. I kept thinking about how Abby had mentioned a few months ago that she was feeling overwhelmed with parenting, and that her relationship with Sean was getting more serious. Was this her plan all along? I didn't want to believe it, but it was starting to look that way. I tried reaching out to a few of Abby's close friends, hoping they might know where she was or what was going on. None of them had any real answers. Most of them just said that Abby deserved this time away. It was frustrating. No one seemed to be taking this seriously, and I was the one left to pick up the pieces. Out of desperation, I called our parents. I thought maybe they'd talk some sense into Abby, but that backfired. My mom brushed it off, telling me it was just a few more days and that I should relax. I couldn't believe it. Everyone was acting like this was normal, but it wasn't. My sister had dumped her kid on me with no notice, no plan, and now she was Mia. By the time Friday rolled around, it had been a full week since Abby dropped Jake off, and there was still no sign of her. My work was suffering. Jake was getting more anxious by the day, and I had no idea what to do next. I even confronted Sean over text, demanding to know when they were coming back, but he just gave me the same vague answers, saying their plans had changed. At this point, I started researching what rights I had as Jake's temporary guardian. I didn't even know if I could make medical decisions for him if something happened. It hit me hard. I had no legal authority here, and that terrified me. Jake's emotional state kept declining. He cried at night, asking for his mom, and I had no idea what to tell him anymore. I was reaching my breaking point. It wasn't just about babysitting for a few days anymore. It was about wondering if Abby was ever coming back. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since Abby dropped off Jake, and honestly, I'm starting to think she's not coming back anytime soon. I haven't heard a single word from her, and Sean has barely responded to any of my texts. When he does, it's always short and vague, something like still figuring things out or we'll be back soon. But at this point, I feel like I'm being ghosted by both of them. Jake's been taking it hard. He's not the same energetic kid I know. Lately, he's been withdrawn, barely talking, and he started refusing food. He picks at his meals and only eats a few bites before saying he's full. I'm trying to make things normal for him, but it's obvious he misses his mom. Night times are the worst. He has trouble falling asleep, and when he does, he wakes up crying, asking when his mom will be back. I don't know what to tell him anymore. To make things worse, Jake's school called me last week. His kindergarten teacher was concerned because no one had picked him up or dropped him off in 2 weeks. I awkwardly explained that I'm his uncle, not his dad, and that I wasn't sure when Abby would be back. The teacher didn't seem convinced and said I should consider contacting social services if things don't change soon. That conversation left me feeling even more on edge. The last thing I want is for social services to get involved, but I'm starting to run out of options. On top of that, the financial pressure is kicking in. I hadn't planned on feeding and entertaining a 5-year-old for 2 weeks straight, and it's starting to hit my wallet. The small bag Abby left with him was barely enough clothes for a weekend, so I've had to buy him more. Between groceries, clothes, and everything else, my savings are taking a hit, and it's stressing me out. Word's gotten around the family about the situation too. Some relatives are saying I'm making a big deal out of it and that Abby's probably just taking some time. Others, though, have been quietly expressing concern. They're worried, but no one's offering any real help. It's like everyone's waiting for Abby to magically show up and fix everything, but I'm starting to doubt that's going to happen. In a last-ditch effort, I reached out to Sean's parents. I thought maybe they'd know something, or at least give me a clue about where Abby and Sean are, but they were just as in the dark as I was. They told me they hadn't heard from Sean in weeks and didn't know what he was up to. So, no help there either. I've even started thinking about filing a missing persons report, but every time I pick up the phone, I stop myself. What if I'm overreacting? What if Abby really does show up tomorrow, acting like everything's fine? But it's been 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Work is a mess. My boss confronted me a few days ago about missed deadlines and my performance slipping. I tried to hold it together, but I ended up explaining everything. She was sympathetic at first, but she made it clear that I need to get it together soon or my job could be at risk. That conversation was a wake-up call. I'm barely holding it together at work. Jake is struggling, and Abby's still Mia. The stress is getting to me. I've started having panic attacks, something that's never happened to me before. It's like the weight of everything is crashing down, and I don't know how to handle it. The uncertainty of when or if Abby will come back is overwhelming, and it's becoming too much. Desperate for some kind of help, I scheduled a session with my therapist. She told me to set boundaries to figure out what I can handle and what I can't. But how am I supposed to set boundaries when there's a 5-year-old who depends on me? I can't just abandon him. Then last night, Jake came down with a high fever. I panicked and rushed him to urgent care. But when we got there, I realized how powerless I am in this situation. Without parental consent, I had no legal authority to make decisions for him. Luckily, the doctors treated him, but it was a huge wake-up call. What if something more serious had happened? After that scare, I started looking into my legal options. I spoke to a lawyer, and he told me I might need to pursue temporary guardianship if Abby doesn't come back soon. I hadn't even thought about that before, but now it feels like the only option if things don't change. Jake's school reached out again, and this time they suggested they might have to contact social services if his mom doesn't return soon. I'm horrified at the thought of Jake being taken away, but I can't keep dodging the school's concerns. Finally, after 2 weeks of radio silence, Abby sent me a text. It was short and infuriating. I'm almost ready to come back. No apology, no explanation, just a vague promise that she'll be back soon. But the worst part, I know deep down that she's not coming back anytime soon. When I read the message, I broke down. It hit me that my sister has no remorse, no guilt, and no urgency to come back for her son. It feels like I'm the only one fighting for Jake's well-being, and I have no idea how much longer I can keep this up. Update 2. It's now been 3 weeks since Abby dropped off Jake, and she's still nowhere to be found. I've only gotten a few sporadic texts from her, and every single one is just vague nonsense like I'm sorting things out or I'll be back soon. But there's never a date, never an explanation, nothing solid that I can hold on to. At this point, I'm beyond furious, but I'm also terrified. What kind of person just leaves their kid for weeks with no real plan? In the meantime, Jake's school enrollment is now a problem. His school has called again, and this time they're not just concerned, they're pressing me to explain what's going on. They've started asking about why he's been absent for so long and why his mom hasn't been in touch with them. They also made it clear that without parental involvement, Jake could lose his spot in the class. I'm scrambling, trying to figure out how to get temporary paperwork together so I can at least sign him up for activities and keep him enrolled. Jake's emotional state has been worsening every day. He's lashing out more frequently, throwing tantrums over the smallest things, and it's clear that the longer Abby stays gone, the more it's affecting him. What's even harder to deal with is that he's stopped talking about her altogether. Anytime someone mentions her name, he just goes silent. I don't know how to comfort him or what to say, because I don't have any answers myself. Then, out of nowhere, the school counselor calls. They're worried about Jake's behavior in class, how he's been withdrawing and not interacting with other kids like he used to. They suggest therapy, but I don't even know if I can sign him up for that without Abby's consent. I'm feeling trapped in a situation I never asked for. Every decision feels like a roadblock because technically I'm not Jake's legal guardian. Things escalate when the school officially threatens to contact social services if Abby doesn't reappear soon. That's when panic really sets in. I can't let Jake end up in foster care. There's no way I'll let that happen. So I reluctantly start the process of filing for temporary guardianship. It feels like the only option at this point, but I'm completely out of my depth. I meet with a lawyer, and it turns out the process is a lot more complicated than I thought. There's paperwork, official notifications, and possibly even a court hearing. I'll have to notify Abby, which is laughable considering she won't even answer basic questions about when she's coming back. And on top of everything, I have to juggle my job while taking care of Jake. The financial strain is getting worse too. Between buying him clothes, groceries, and now legal fees, I'm burning through my savings fast. I can't afford to take time off from work, but my job performance is suffering as it is. I'm seriously starting to worry about losing my job. Just when I'm about to file the guardianship paperwork, Abby calls. I thought this would be it, that she'd finally apologize or explain what's been going on. But instead, she nonchalantly tells me she's extending the trip and will be gone a while longer. I couldn't believe it. She acted like everything was normal, like leaving her kid for weeks without any concrete plans was no big deal. During the call, she even tried to shift the blame onto me, saying she needed this break and that I should stop being so dramatic about the situation. She claimed she was going to send money soon to help out, but I seriously doubt that's going to happen. The whole thing was infuriating. It was like she had no sense of responsibility at all. After the call, I tried reaching out to Sean, hoping maybe he'd give me more details or something, but he's completely ghosted me now. He's no longer involved, and I'm starting to suspect something has gone seriously wrong between him and Abby. Whatever is happening, it's clear that Abby's ability to parent Jake is spiraling out of control. I've talked to a few other family members about the situation, but they're all divided. Some of them feel sorry for me, but they're not offering any real help. Others think I'm overreacting, which blows my mind. They know Abby has always been irresponsible, but this level of neglect is shocking, even for her. I went back to my therapist after all of this. She's advised me to set boundaries with Abby and make a formal decision about Jake's care. She warned me that Abby might not come back for a long time, and I need to protect both myself and Jake. That was hard to hear, but it's becoming more and more obvious that I have to do something. I can't just wait around for Abby to decide when she's ready to come back. After a lot of internal debate, I've made the decision to file for temporary guardianship. I know it's going to cause a huge rift between me and Abby, but I can't keep living in this limbo. Jake deserves stability, and right now I'm the only one providing that for him. It's tough because Jake has been getting more attached to me every day. He's even started calling me mom by accident, which honestly breaks my heart. I'm torn between my anger at Abby and my deepening love for my nephew. I posted an update on Reddit, explaining everything that's been going on. The overwhelming support I received gave me the courage to keep fighting for Jake. People shared their own stories of dealing with neglectful family members and urged me to stay strong. I did get a few messages from strangers warning me to be cautious about Abby's potential legal retaliation, which is something I'll need to be prepared for. But for now, I'm focused on getting the guardianship sorted and doing what's best for Jake. Update 3. It's now been a full month since Abby dropped Jake off, and there's still no sign of her coming back. A month. I've officially filed for temporary guardianship because, at this point, what else could I do? But the process is slow and draining. Every day feels like a marathon, and I'm barely keeping up. My lawyer warned me that if Abby shows up before the court hearing, she could try to reclaim Jake, which scares the hell out of me. I can't imagine her just waltzing back into Jake's life after all this and acting like nothing happened. I've tried texting and calling her multiple times over the past few weeks, but she's completely stopped responding. No updates, no explanations, just silence. Even Sean has disappeared off the face of the earth. No replies to my messages and no activity on social media. Speaking of social media, Abby's accounts have gone totally inactive. This isn't like her at all. She's the type to post every meal, every random thought, and every night out. Now, nothing. It's making me wonder if something serious is going on, but what could I do with no way to reach her? The guardianship process, on top of everything else, is exhausting. There are so many legal hurdles I didn't expect. I have to keep filling out forms, dealing with notifications, and preparing for the possibility of a court hearing. I'm terrified of the idea that Abby could just show up and decide she wants Jake back. Given her neglect, I can't even imagine how the court would let that happen, but the thought is constantly looming over me. The stress is getting to me too. I'm not sleeping. I stay up late every night, worrying about everything: Jake, the guardianship, work, my finances. I'm running on fumes at this point, and my anxiety has been through the roof. My therapist suggested that I take a leave of absence from work, but how can I? I can't afford to stop working, not when I've already maxed out my credit cards just trying to cover groceries and rent. Every day feels like a struggle to just keep it all together. And then, to make things worse, social services showed up at my door. The school must have tipped them off. When I saw them, my heart dropped. I thought for sure they'd think I wasn't fit to take care of Jake, that they'd take him away. The interview was tense, and I was terrified the entire time. They asked about Abby, about Jake's care, and I explained everything: how she just left, how I've been taking care of him. After what felt like the longest conversation of my life, they left. They didn't say much beyond that I need to move quickly with the guardianship case. It was a relief that they didn't take Jake, but it was a huge wake-up call that I can't drag this process out any longer. Jake's been struggling too. He's been having nightmares about being abandoned. He wakes up crying, and I spend most nights comforting him, trying to convince him that everything's going to be okay. His attachment to me has grown stronger, and he's been calling me mom more and more often, which breaks my heart. He's just a kid, and he's dealing with all this uncertainty. I'm trying my best, but some days it feels like I'm barely managing. Financially, I'm at rock bottom. I've maxed out my credit cards, and I'm barely scraping by. I posted an update on Reddit, and kind strangers sent me resources for single caregivers, which helped a bit, but it's not enough to cover everything. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. A close friend offered to take Jake for a weekend so I could have some time to myself. At first, I felt guilty, like I shouldn't need a break, but after everything, I knew I had to accept. I was nearing burnout, and I needed a moment to just breathe. So I let her take him for the weekend. The weekend without Jake was strange. On the one hand, I missed him terribly. The house was too quiet, and it felt like something was missing. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I had a moment to just think. It made me realize how much my life has changed in the last month. Everything has been about Jake, about making sure he's okay, about keeping things running smoothly. I've sacrificed so much, but I wouldn't change any of it. He needs me right now, and I'm all he has. Then, out of nowhere, Abby sent me a message. It was brief and frustratingly vague. I'm dealing with personal stuff. I'll be back soon. No explanation, no apology, no answers. I shared the message with our parents, hoping they'd finally take this seriously, but it only made the family divide worse. Some relatives are still making excuses for her, saying she's going through something, while others are starting to question if Abby's even fit to be a mother at this point. It's exhausting dealing with all of it. Jake's bond with me has grown even stronger. He told me the other day that he doesn't want to go back to his mom when she returns. That hit me hard. It's clear how deeply Abby's absence has affected him, and the thought of him going back to her unstable life terrifies me. I've become more determined than ever to gain full guardianship of Jake. I know Abby might fight me on this, but I can't let him return to that chaos. He deserves stability, and I'm the only one providing it. After my latest Reddit update, the community was outraged at Abby's behavior. People shared their own stories of neglectful parents, and it gave me the strength to keep fighting for Jake. But just as things seemed to be settling into a routine, I got an ominous text from Abby: "I'll be back soon. We need to talk." I can't explain it, but that message filled me with a sense of dread. Something's coming, and I know it's not going to be easy. Update 4. 2 days after that cryptic message from Abby, she showed up at my apartment completely unannounced. I wasn't expecting her, not after a month of silence and avoidance, and certainly not in the state she was in. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. She looked haggard, worn down, and disheveled, like she hadn't slept in days. There was no sign of Sean, and she was alone. This wasn't the same Abby who dropped off Jake weeks ago. Something was seriously wrong. Jake was in the living room when she arrived. The moment he saw her, he lit up and ran straight to her, but there was this hesitation in his steps, like he wasn't sure if he should be happy or scared. He clung to her leg, asking if she was going to leave again. Abby gave him some weak reassurance that she was back for good, but even I could tell she wasn't convincing anyone. Not Jake, and definitely not me. I stood there, watching, already dreading what was about to happen. After Jake went back to playing in his room, I confronted her. It wasn't like I had much of a choice. I had to know where she had been and why she left her son for a whole month without any contact. But Abby brushed it off, as if leaving Jake for weeks was no big deal. She said she had things to figure out and needed time alone, like that was supposed to justify everything. She gave me nothing solid, just vague excuses. And when I asked about Sean, she completely dodged the question, refusing to mention him at all. Instead, she got defensive, accusing me of overreacting and making her feel guilty for needing space. The conversation quickly turned into a mess of back and forth, with Abby refusing to take any responsibility for what she did. During our argument, Jake overheard bits and pieces of what was happening. He came into the room, crying. Abby tried to comfort him, but it was half-hearted at best. Jake didn't even respond to her attempt and clung to me instead. That moment was crushing. It was obvious to both of us that Jake didn't feel safe with her anymore. He felt more secure with me, and that only made everything harder. At that point, I couldn't hold back any longer. I told Abby I had filed for temporary guardianship of Jake. She lost it. She accused me of trying to steal her son, of trying to take over her life. I explained that I had no choice. She had been gone for a month with no word, and I had to do what was best for Jake, but Abby wouldn't hear it. She tried to guilt-trip me, saying she had always wanted to be a good mother, but life had been really hard for her lately. She begged for another chance to make things right, claiming she didn't need anyone else raising her son. I wasn't buying it. I gave her an ultimatum: either prove that she could take care of Jake by staying in his life consistently, or leave and let the guardianship process continue. Abby didn't respond right away. She just stood there, looking shaken, like she didn't know what to say. That silence said more than her words ever could. The next day, my parents called. Word had gotten around that Abby was back, and now they were trying to mediate. They suggested I give her another chance, that maybe this time she'd really step up as a mother. I was torn. I didn't want to alienate my family, but I knew I couldn't let Jake go back to the instability Abby had brought into his life. His well-being had to come first, no matter what. Abby, on the other hand, started making promises. She told Jake they'd spend more time together, that she'd take him to fun places, and that things would be different. She told me she was staying in town for good, but I wasn't convinced. Abby had always been unreliable, and I had no reason to believe this time would be any different. Her return also threw a wrench in the guardianship process. My lawyer told me that now that she was back, things could get complicated. If Abby contested the guardianship, it could turn into a long and painful legal battle. I was frustrated beyond belief, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't let her sudden return derail everything I'd been working to secure for Jake. In the days that followed, Jake became more and more confused. On one hand, he wanted to be with his mom, but he was also scared she might disappear again. He kept asking me if she was going to stay, and I didn't know how to answer without hurting him. The uncertainty was tearing him apart. Despite all her promises, Abby's behavior started to unravel quickly. She would stay out late, coming back to the apartment at odd hours, leaving Jake with me more often than not. I realized then that her presence was actually more harmful than her absence. She was around, but not really there. After witnessing her erratic behavior for another week, I made the hardest decision of my life. I was going to pursue full custody of Jake. It would destroy my relationship with Abby, but I couldn't keep watching Jake suffer like this. He needed stability, and I was the only one who could give it to him. I posted another update on Reddit, explaining everything that had happened since Abby's return. The responses poured in. Many people supported my decision to go for full custody, but there were others who accused me of overstepping, of trying to take Jake away from his mother. The mixed reactions left me feeling conflicted, but in the end, I knew I had to do what was best for Jake, no matter what. I thought things were finally starting to settle down, but then I received another text from Abby: "I'll be back soon. We need to talk." That message filled me with dread. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. A confrontation was coming, and I had no idea how it was going to play out. Update 5. After Abby's sudden return and erratic behavior, I knew that temporary guardianship wasn't going to cut it anymore. Jake needed more than that. He needed stability, something Abby clearly couldn't provide, so I filed for full custody. My lawyer warned me it wouldn't be an easy fight. Abby could challenge the case, and it would likely get messy, but I was prepared to do whatever it took to keep Jake safe. I couldn't let him be dragged back into the chaos. When Abby found out about the custody filing, she completely lost it. She showed up at my apartment again, shouting that I had betrayed her and that I was trying to steal her son. The yelling echoed through the small space, and before I knew it, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I didn't see her for the rest of the night. Unfortunately, Jake had overheard the entire outburst. He was terrified. He kept asking me over and over if his mom was coming back or if she was gone for good this time. I reassured him as best as I could, but the instability was really taking a toll on him. He was already struggling emotionally, and now this added another layer of uncertainty. For several days, Abby didn't return. It was like she had vanished again, leaving me fully in charge of Jake without so much as a word. I had to tell Jake that his mom was just taking some time to think, but I could tell he wasn't buying it. Honestly, neither was I. Abby's behavior was spiraling out of control, and I had no idea where she was or what she was doing. When she finally did show up, it was worse than I could have imagined. She looked terrible, disheveled, incoherent, and clearly under the influence of something. It was like she had hit rock bottom, and I knew right then that this situation was way beyond anything I could handle on my own. Jake couldn't be around this, and neither could I. Fearing for both Jake's safety and Abby's well-being, I made the difficult decision to call the police and social services. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but at this point I had no choice. Abby was taken to the hospital for evaluation, and the authorities opened a case. Watching her being led away was heartbreaking, but deep down, I knew it was the right thing to do. This wasn't just about custody anymore, it was about getting Abby the help she needed. Jake was devastated when he found out his mom was in the hospital. He didn't understand what was going on, and I had to find a way to explain the situation without making him feel like she had abandoned him again. It was a delicate balance, telling him the truth without overwhelming him. He was still so young, and this whole situation was far too heavy for him to process fully. With Abby now in the hospital, the custody battle took on new urgency. My lawyer said that this could work in my favor since Abby's unfit state might convince the court to grant me full custody. But as much as I wanted to protect Jake, I felt conflicted about the whole process. I didn't want to destroy my sister, but I also couldn't let Jake go back to that kind of instability. A few days later, I received a text from Abby. It was a half-hearted apology, saying she didn't mean for things to get this bad and that she needed help. It was the first time she had admitted that she had issues, but I wasn't holding my breath for real change. I'd seen this before, promises made in moments of crisis that never amounted to anything. Still, it was something, I guess. The court date for the custody hearing was set, and I felt the anxiety rising as it approached. The outcome of that day would determine Jake's future, and I needed to be prepared. My lawyer and I gathered every bit of evidence we had, texts, records of Abby's absence, her erratic behavior. I knew it was going to be a tough fight, but I had to make sure the court understood what Jake had been through. Meanwhile, I finally got Jake into therapy. His therapist was a godsend. Jake started to open up about his fears of abandonment, about how confused he was by his mom's behavior. It was heartbreaking to hear, but at least now he had someone to help him process it all. The trauma he'd been through was deeper than I realized, and it was going to take a long time for him to fully heal. As the court date got closer, the family tension hit a new high. Abby's side of the family accused me of trying to ruin her life, saying I was overstepping and taking things too far. Other relatives, though, quietly supported my decision. Family gatherings became tense and awkward, with everyone walking on eggshells around the topic. It was clear that lines had been drawn, and there was no going back. The day of the court hearing finally arrived. Abby showed up looking more put together than I expected, but there was still a heaviness about her. She made a last-ditch effort to convince the judge that she was getting better and that Jake belonged with her. But my lawyer presented a strong case, outlining her neglect and the instability Jake had faced over the past month. After a tense day in court, the judge ruled in my favor. I was granted full custody of Jake, and Abby was given supervised visitation, pending her completion of a rehab program. I felt a wave of relief, but there was sadness mixed in. I had won the legal battle, but I knew the emotional toll on Jake was far from over. This wasn't the ending I wanted for my family, but it was the best decision for Jake's future. I posted one final update on Reddit after the verdict. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. People shared their own stories of similar struggles, encouraging me to stay strong for Jake. It wasn't the outcome anyone had hoped for, but at least now, Jake had a stable home, and that was what mattered most. Hi, my name's Alex. I'm 28 years old, single, and work as an IT specialist. If you asked anyone to describe me, they'd probably say I'm quiet, maybe a little too quiet. I guess it's just how I've always been, content with doing my own thing while everyone else in the family takes center stage. I'm the youngest of 3 siblings. My older brother Jake is 35, and my sister Emily is 32. Growing up, they were the loud, energetic ones, Jake always cracking jokes, Emily commanding attention with her quick wit. Meanwhile, I'd sit in the corner, tinkering with some gadget or lost in a book. It wasn't that I didn't love my family, I do, but it felt like I didn't quite fit into their world of inside jokes and endless chatter. We grew up in a middle-class home in the suburbs. Our parents, Sarah and Mike, worked hard to give us a good life. Dad was a construction manager and Mom worked part-time as a teacher's aide. They weren't rich, but they always made sure we had what we needed. Birthdays, holidays, family dinners, it was all filled with love, even if it sometimes felt a little chaotic. The thing about being the youngest, though, is that your voice tends to get drowned out. Jake and Emily were always the go-to for opinions. If there was a family decision, Mom and Dad would ask them first. And when I spoke up, it was like my words didn't carry the same weight. Not that I minded too much, I learned to keep my head down and go with the flow. But looking back, maybe I let them overlook me a little too often. Despite that, I've always tried to do my part for the family. When Mom and Dad celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary, I chipped in for the big party we threw for them. I remember handing over a few $100 without hesitation because, well, that's what family does. When Emily needed help paying off her college loans a few years ago, I lent her some money without a second thought. And when Jake's car broke down, I helped him with the repair costs. The funny thing is, I've never really asked for anything in return. It's not that I'm a saint or anything, I just thought that's how families worked. You support each other because you love each other. And honestly, I never expected much anyway. I've always believed that being there for them when they needed it was enough. But as much as I love them, there's always been this nagging feeling that I'm more of a spectator in my own family. Jake and Emily are close in a way I'm not. They share memories and inside jokes that I'm not part of. Even as adults, they still gang up in playful teasing, leaving me to laugh along awkwardly. Mom and Dad are loving, no doubt about it, but their attention seems to naturally gravitate toward the two of them. Take family gatherings, for example. If Jake brought up a problem at work or Emily talked about her latest travel adventure, the room would light up with interest. When it was my turn to share something, I'd get a polite nod and then the conversation would move on. It's not that they didn't care, it's just that I was easy to overlook. Still, I tried not to let it bother me. I told myself it didn't matter. I had my career, my hobbies, and my small circle of friends. Life was fine. I didn't need to be the star of the show. But every now and then I'd catch myself wondering, did they even notice how much I tried? How much I gave? Even at work, I'm the reliable, behind-the-scenes guy. As an IT specialist, my job is to make sure everything runs smoothly, fixing problems, optimizing systems, staying calm under pressure. It's not glamorous, but I'm good at it. It pays the bills and gives me a sense of accomplishment. But just like at home, I'm used to being the guy people only notice when something goes wrong. If you asked me a month ago, I would have said everything in my life was fine. Not perfect, but fine. I had a steady job, a roof over my head, and a family that, despite its quirks, I love deeply. Sure, I wasn't the center of attention, but I didn't need to be. Then I overheard a conversation that changed everything. But I'll get to that later. For now, just know this. I never saw myself as the kind of person who'd dig for secrets or confront anyone about them. I liked to keep the peace, avoid drama, and let things slide. But sometimes, life doesn't let you stay in your comfort zone. Sometimes it throws something in your face that forces you to ask questions you'd rather avoid. This story isn't about me wanting revenge or causing a scene. It's about what happens when you realize you've been left out of something that mattered, something that should have included you. It's about finding your voice when you've been quiet for too long. And maybe, just maybe, it's about learning that being family doesn't always mean being fair. A couple of weeks ago, something strange happened that I can't seem to shake. That was started small. So small that at first I brushed it off as nothing. But as the days went on, the little things added up, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. It all began one evening when I walked into the kitchen and heard my mom and sister Emily talking in hushed voices. They didn't notice me at first, which gave me a second to catch a few words. Emily said something like, "We need to finalize the villa soon. If we wait any longer, it might get booked." I frowned, confused. A villa? Finalize? That didn't sound like a casual conversation about groceries or weekend plans. "What are you two whispering about?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Both of them jumped a little, like kids caught sneaking candy. Mom quickly turned to me with a smile that felt just a bit too bright. "Oh, nothing important," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "We were just talking about a hypothetical trip. You know, one of those maybe someday plans." "Yeah," Emily chimed in, her voice a little too cheerful. "It's just an idea for the future. Nothing set in stone." I nodded slowly, pretending to accept their answer. But something felt off. My family wasn't exactly known for hypothetical discussions. If they were talking about a trip, it was usually something already in motion. Still, I didn't want to overthink it. Maybe I'd misheard or misunderstood. I told myself not to jump to conclusions and let it go, at least for the moment. But over the next week, things only got weirder. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find my dad on the phone. He was speaking in a low voice, which wasn't unusual. He's a private guy. But as I approached, I caught him saying, "We'll just use the fund for that part. It should cover everything." Before I could ask what he meant, he glanced up, saw me, and immediately changed the subject. "Hey Alex, how's work going?" he asked, forcing a casual tone. Then he ended the call with a quick, "I'll get back to you later," and tucked his phone into his pocket. I wanted to ask him about the fund, but something in his demeanor stopped me. It was like he didn't want me to know what he was talking about. And the way he quickly redirected the conversation only made me more suspicious. A day or two later, I noticed another odd moment. Emily was texting someone, probably mom, judging by the look on her face, and as I walked past, I caught a glimpse of the screen. The text read, "So who's going for sure? Did you confirm yet?" She noticed me looking and tilted her phone away, giving me a quick, "What's up?" like nothing had happened. I tried to act casual, just wondering what you're texting about. "Oh, nothing important," she said, slipping her phone into her pocket. "Just making plans with some friends." Again, I let it go, but the uneasy feeling in my gut grew stronger. It wasn't just one odd moment, it was a pattern. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room, coded phrases like "the fund" and "who's going," and the way everyone brushed me off whenever I asked questions. I couldn't help but feel like I was being deliberately kept out of the loop. At first, I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Families have inside jokes and private conversations all the time, right? Just because I wasn't involved didn't mean something shady was going on. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much these little moments bothered me. It wasn't just about the trip, or whatever they were planning. It was about the way they treated me. Like I was an afterthought, like I didn't need to know what was going on. I replayed those moments in my head, trying to make sense of them. Mom and Emily talking about a villa, Dad mentioning the fund, Emily's secretive texts. Was it all connected? Or was I overreacting? The truth is, I've always had this nagging feeling of being on the outside looking in when it comes to my family, but I'd learned to live with it, chalking it up to being the quiet one. This time, though, the feeling was harder to ignore. I tried to talk myself out of it. "You're being ridiculous," I told myself. "They're probably just planning something simple, and you're reading too much into it." But a small voice in the back of my mind whispered, "What if you're not?" The uneasiness lingered, no matter how much I tried to push it aside. Something was going on, something they didn't want me to know about. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I could just sit back and let it slide. The weirdness had been hanging in the air for days, but I kept telling myself not to make a big deal out of it. Families keep secrets sometimes, right? It didn't mean anything serious. Or at least that's what I wanted to believe. But then came the family dinner that changed everything. It was a regular Sunday night at my parents' house. Mom had made her famous roast chicken and the whole family was there, Jake, Emily, my parents, and me. Conversation flowed easily, as usual, with Jake cracking jokes and Emily telling some story about her coworker's messy dating life. I chimed in here and there, but mostly listened, as I often do. About halfway through dinner, Dad mentioned his computer acting up again. "Alex, you think you can take a look at it later?" he asked. "Sure," I said. I'd lost count of how many times I'd fixed his computer. It was kind of my thing, being the go-to tech guy in the family. Honestly, I didn't mind. It gave me a chance to sneak away when the noise of the dinner table got to be too much. After we finished eating, I excused myself and headed to Dad's office to grab the laptop. His desk was as cluttered as ever. Papers, pens, random knickknacks, and the usual tangle of charging cables. I started searching for a spare cable I needed to test the laptop, but as I opened one of the drawers, I noticed a folder sitting on top of a stack of documents. It was labeled Vacation Fund in bold black letters. For a second, I just stared at it. My mind flashed back to all the strange conversations I'd overheard over the past week. The villa, the fund, the vague texts. My gut told me this folder might have the answers I was looking for. I hesitated. I wasn't the type to snoop, and part of me felt guilty for even considering it, but the curiosity and the uneasy feeling that had been nagging at me won out. I opened the folder. Inside, I found detailed spreadsheets. They were neatly organized with tabs labeled by year and columns for contributions, expenses, and balances. It didn't take long to figure out what I was looking at. This was a family fund, and from the looks of it, it had been running for at least 5 years. The total amount? Nearly $50,000. $50,000 is still a lot. It was brought down gradually for years and probably many higher. My heart sank as I scrolled through the names listed under the contributions column. Mom, Dad, Jake, Emily, but not me. I flipped to another tab labeled Italy Itinerary. It was a full plan for a 2-week trip. Flights, accommodations, activities, even restaurant reservations. Everyone in the family was listed as part of the trip, except for one glaring omission. Me. I sat back in the chair, my mind racing. This wasn't just some random coincidence or misunderstanding. They had a whole fund, a secret fund, and they'd intentionally left me out. It wasn't just about the money either. It was the fact that they'd planned this trip, this massive family event, without even telling me. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I wanted to be angry, but mostly I just felt hurt. How could they do this? Didn't I matter to them? Had I done something to make them exclude me? I closed the folder and put it back exactly where I found it. My hands were shaking as I tried to act normal, but the rest of dinner was a blur. I could barely look at anyone, especially my dad. The betrayal I felt was too raw. Later that night, I waited until everyone else had left. As Mom cleaned up the kitchen, I found Dad in the living room, flipping through channels. I took a deep breath and walked in, determined to get some answers. Dad, I started, trying to keep my voice steady. Can we talk for a second? Of course, he said, lowering the remote. What's on your mind? I was in your office earlier, I said, watching his expression carefully. I found a folder on your desk, the one labeled Vacation Fund. For a split second, his face froze. Then he gave me a weak smile. Oh, that? It's nothing serious, just some old paperwork. Dad, I said firmly, don't do that. I saw what's in there. The spreadsheets, the Italy plans. I know about the fund. He sighed and leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Alex, it's complicated. That's not an answer, I said, my voice rising despite myself. Why wasn't I included? Why does everyone else get to be part of this but not me? It's not like that, he said quickly. The fund is, well, it's a family tradition. We started it years ago to save up for big trips, like anniversaries or vacations. But I'm part of this family, aren't I? I asked, feeling the hurt creep into my voice. Why didn't anyone tell me about it? He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. At the time, you were just starting out in your career. We didn't think you'd be able to contribute consistently, so we didn't want to put pressure on you. And then, well, I guess we just forgot. Forgot, I repeated, the words stinging like a slap. You forgot about me? It wasn't intentional, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. You have to understand. It's not about excluding you. Then what is it about? I demanded. But instead of answering, he just shook his head and mumbled something about it being a misunderstanding. I stared at him, waiting for more, but it was clear he wasn't going to give me any real explanation. Finally, I stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, the spreadsheets and itineraries kept replaying in my mind. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, one thought refused to leave me. They didn't forget. They chose to leave me out. The days following my discovery were some of the most awkward and frustrating of my life. I couldn't stop thinking about that folder, about the fund, the trip, and the realization that I'd been left out. No matter how many times I replayed my dad's excuses in my head, they didn't make sense. We forgot? How do you forget a family member? But instead of stewing in my own thoughts, I decided to confront them. If they wanted to leave me out, they could at least explain why. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Another family dinner was planned for the following Sunday. I knew this would be my chance to bring it up. I rehearsed what I wanted to say over and over in my mind, trying to make sure I stayed calm. No shouting, no accusations, just honest questions. The evening started off as it always did. Mom had prepared a big meal and everyone was chatting and laughing as though everything was perfectly normal. I sat quietly, my stomach twisting with nerves, waiting for the right moment. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, I decided it was time. I cleared my throat and said, "Can we talk about something?" All eyes turned to me. Jake raised an eyebrow, Emily looked curious, and Mom tilted her head, smiling gently. "Of course, sweetie, what's on your mind?" I took a deep breath. I found out about the vacation fund. The room went silent. Jake and Emily exchanged a quick glance, and Mom's smile faltered. Dad set his coffee cup down, suddenly very interested in the floor. "What about it?" Jake asked cautiously. "I mean, I didn't even know it existed until a few days ago," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "And now I find out you've been planning a trip to Italy without me?" Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Alex, it's not like that." "Then what is it like?" I asked, looking at each of them. "You've been planning this for years, and somehow I'm the only one who wasn't included. Why?" There was an awkward pause before Emily spoke up again. "You never seemed that interested in vacations." I blinked at her. "What? What does that even mean?" "Well," Jake cut in, "you're always busy with work. We just figured you wouldn't have the time or, the interest." "That's ridiculous," I shot back. "You figured? You didn't even ask me," Mom jumped in, trying to smooth things over. "Alex, honey, we didn't mean to hurt you. It's just, you're not really part of the fund." I stared at her, stunned. "Not part of the fund? How is that even possible? I'm part of this family, aren't I?" "Of course you are," she said quickly, looking flustered. "But when we started the fund, you were just starting your job and we thought it would be hard for you to contribute. We didn't want to pressure you." "So, you didn't even tell me it existed?" I said, my voice rising. "You just decided for me?" Dad finally spoke up, his tone defensive. "Alex, it wasn't personal. We were trying to be considerate. And then, as time went on, it just slipped our minds." "Slipped your minds?" I repeated, the anger bubbling up. "You're telling me that for 5 years, while you all saved up and made plans, you just forgot about me?" "It's not like we were trying to exclude you," Jake said, though he didn't sound convincing. "That's exactly what you did." I snapped. "You excluded me. You made this decision without even giving me a chance. Do you know how that feels?" Mom's eyes started to well up with tears. "Alex, please don't take it this way. We love you. This was never about pushing you away." "Then what was it about?" I demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it sure looks like you don't think I'm as much a part of this family as the rest of you." Emily looked at me, guilt written all over her face. "We didn't think it would matter this much. We figured you were happy doing your own thing." "Well, you figured wrong," I said, my voice shaking. "All my life I've been there for this family. I've helped out when you needed money, I've shown up for every event, and yet somehow I'm always the one left out, always the one who doesn't get a say." The room was dead silent. Mom started crying softly, and Jake and Emily both looked down, unable to meet my eyes. Dad muttered something under his breath, but I didn't catch it. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "I'm not angry about the money. I don't care about the fund itself. What hurts is that none of you thought I deserved to be part of it. You didn't even give me the choice." "We messed up," Jake admitted quietly. "I didn't realize how it would feel to you. I'm sorry." "Me too," Emily added, her voice barely above a whisper. But their apologies didn't feel like enough. Not right now. I stood up, suddenly feeling like I needed some air. "I need some time," I said, walking toward the door. "You've had 5 years to figure this out. I need at least a few days." Without waiting for a response, I left. As I drove home, my mind swirled with a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. How had this happened? How had the people I loved most in the world decided I wasn't important enough to include? For the first time in my life, I felt like an outsider in my own family. After that confrontation, I couldn't bring myself to face my family. The betrayal was too fresh, the hurt too raw. So I decided to step back. For the first time in my life, I distanced myself from them. I ignored calls and text messages from my parents, Jake and Emily. Family dinner invitations went unanswered. Even when Mom sent a cheery group text about movie night at home, I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. At first, I thought the distance would help me clear my head, but the silence was suffocating. Every unanswered call and unacknowledged text added to the weight in my chest. I'd catch myself staring at my phone, wondering if I should just pick up and get it over with. But then I'd remember the years of being overlooked, the secret fund, and the fact that they'd planned a dream vacation without me. And just like that, my resolve to stay distant returned. Of course, my family didn't make it easy. Mom was the first to break through my wall of silence. She sent me a long text, starting with, "Alex, sweetie, I know you're upset, but we're family and family forgives. You can't let this ruin everything." She went on about how families have their flaws, how nobody's perfect, and how I needed to move on for the sake of family unity. She even added, "You know how much I hate seeing my kids upset with each other." I read the message twice, my frustration growing with each word. It wasn't an apology, it was a guilt trip, a way to make me feel bad for being hurt. She wasn't acknowledging how they'd excluded me, she was just trying to sweep it under the rug. I didn't reply. Then came the texts from Emily. Hers were shorter but still frustrating. "Alex, I feel awful about everything. I didn't mean to hurt you. Let's talk?" Jake's messages were more direct. "I'm sorry, man. I get why you're upset. Let's grab a beer and hash it out." But I wasn't ready to hash it out. Not yet. I needed time to figure out how I felt, how to process everything without being overwhelmed by their voices and opinions. So I kept my distance. As the days turned into weeks, I learned from mutual friends that my siblings had started arguing among themselves. Emily apparently blamed Jake for not taking things seriously when they started the fund. Jake shot back that it wasn't just his fault, that everyone, including Mom and Dad, had agreed to leave me out initially. Hearing about their arguments should have made me feel better, but it didn't. If anything, it made me feel worse. My family wasn't just excluding me, they were falling apart over it. And as much as I wanted to be angry, I didn't want to be the reason they were fighting. One evening, I met up with my friend Mark. Mark and I have known each other since high school, and he's one of the few people I trust enough to vent to. We grabbed coffee at a quiet cafe, and as soon as we sat down, the words started pouring out. "I don't even know what hurts more," I admitted. "The fact that they left me out for 5 years, or the way they're acting like I should just get over it." Mark listened quietly, nodding as I spoke. When I finally ran out of steam, he leaned back in his chair and said, "It sounds like you're focusing a lot on the money." I frowned. What do you mean? I get fun stings," he said. "It's a tangible thing. You can point to it and say, that's what they did to me. But I think what's really bothering you isn't the money. It's what the money represents." I stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "Think about it," he continued. You're not mad because they didn't let you put money in a savings account. You're mad because they made a decision without you, because they didn't even think to include you. It's not about dollars and cents, it's about being treated like you're not part of the family." I sat back, his words hitting me like a punch to the gut. He was right. It wasn't the fund itself that hurt, it was what it symbolized. It was years of being overlooked and excluded, boiled down into one glaring example. "So what do?" I asked, feeling more lost than ever. "How do I fix this?" Mark shrugged. "You need to talk to them, not about the fund, but about how this made you feel. If they don't get that, nothing else is going to change." The thought of having another confrontation with my family made my stomach twist, but I knew Mark was right. Ignoring them wasn't solving anything. It was just making me feel more isolated. If I wanted things to change, I had to be honest with them, even if it was uncomfortable. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed Mark's advice over and over in my head. I didn't know if I was ready to talk to my family, but I knew I couldn't keep running forever. At some point, I'd have to face them again, and this time I'd make sure they understood exactly how much their actions had hurt me. Weeks went by, and I thought I'd started to come to terms with the situation. I wasn't over it, not by a long shot, but I was learning to carry the weight of the hurt without letting it crush me. Mark's advice about focusing on the emotional impact instead of the financial side stuck with me. Still, the silence from my family was deafening, and I wondered if they'd decided to just let me drift away. Maybe that's what I had wanted in the moment, but now the thought of being forgotten felt even worse. Then one evening, out of nowhere, Jake called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. He wasn't the type to keep calling if I ignored him, so if he was reaching out, it had to be important. "Hey," I said cautiously as I picked up the phone. "Hey, Alex," Jake replied, his voice unusually subdued. "Can we talk?" I hesitated. "About what?" "About everything," he said. "The fund, the trip, all of it." I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "Look," he said, exhaling deeply, "we messed up, big time. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and you're right, we didn't include you, and that's on us. I guess we thought you weren't as into family stuff as the rest of us." "What does that even mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake sighed again. "I don't know, man. You've always been the quiet one, doing your own thing. I guess we took that as you not wanting to be as involved. But looking back, that's on us, not you. We pushed you away without even realizing it." His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it felt genuine. Still, the hurt was too fresh for me to let it go that easily. "So you just decided I wasn't interested?" I said, "without even asking me?" I know, Jake said quickly. "It was stupid. We didn't think it through. And the truth is, we got comfortable with it. It was easier to keep things the way they were than to fix it." "I'm sorry, Alex. Really." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to make him feel the way I'd felt. But another part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in my family, felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the start of making things right. But then Jake said something that sent me reeling. "Also, I feel like you should know, the trip's next month." I froze. "What?" "The Italy trip," he said, his voice cautious. "It's happening next month. Mom and Emily wanted to wait before telling you, but I thought you deserved to know." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything, they still hadn't planned to tell me about the trip. It was one thing to exclude me from the fund, but now they were going on the vacation they'd all been planning for years, and I wasn't even invited. "You're kidding, right?" I said, my voice shaking. "Alex, I'm sorry," Jake said quickly. "I didn't think it was right either. That's why I'm telling you now. I thought you'd want to know." I didn't reply. My mind was spinning, the hurt and betrayal crashing over me all over again. After a long pause, Jake added, "Maybe you should come to the next family meeting. Get everything out in the open." "Yeah," I said flatly. "Maybe I should." We hung up soon after, and I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. My anger had simmered down over the weeks, but now it was back, hotter than ever. This wasn't just about the fund or the trip anymore. This was about a pattern, a lifetime of being treated like an afterthought, and I was done letting it slide. The next weekend, I showed up at my parents' house for the family meeting. They looked surprised to see me, but no one said anything as I sat down in the living room. Jake, Emily, Mom, and Dad were all there, and the tension in the room was almost suffocating. I didn't waste time. "So the trip's next month," I said, looking directly at Mom. Her eyes widened, and she glanced at Jake, who quickly looked away. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Mom hesitated. "We were going to, sweetie. We didn't know how to bring it up after everything that's happened." "That's a weak excuse," I said, cutting her off. "You didn't tell me because you didn't want me to come. Just admit it." "Alex, that's not fair," Emily said. "It's not like we don't want you there." "Really?" I shot back. "Because it sure feels like that. You've been planning this trip for years. You had every opportunity to include me, and you didn't. And now, even after I found out about the fund, you still didn't bother to tell me." Dad finally spoke up. "Alex, we're sorry. We handled this wrong. But you have to understand, this wasn't about leaving you out. It was about keeping things simple." "Simple?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Do you even hear yourselves? You excluded me for years, and now you're trying to make it sound like it wasn't a big deal." "Alex, please," Mom said, her voice breaking. "We're a family. We've made mistakes, but we love you. Can't we just move forward?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. Moving forward is the goal, but we're not getting there until you understand how much this hurt me. It's not just about the trip. It's about how I've always been treated, like I don't matter as much as everyone else. The room went silent. For the first time, they didn't try to argue or defend themselves. They just listened. "I'm tired of being the outsider in my own family," I said. "If you want to fix this, then you need to start treating me like I belong here." I stood up to leave, my heart pounding. "I'll let you decide if that's something you're willing to do." As I walked out the door, I felt a strange mix of emotions: hurt, anger, and maybe, just maybe, a glimmer of hope. And after that family meeting, I didn't know what to expect. I'd said my piece, laid it all out for them, but walking away didn't feel like a victory. It felt like I'd ripped open old wounds and left them on display, hoping my family would care enough to help them heal. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. No calls, no texts, just silence. Part of me worried I'd gone too far, that I'd driven a wedge between us that couldn't be repaired. But deep down, I knew I couldn't have kept pretending everything was fine. If this was the price of honesty, I was willing to pay it. Then, about a week later, Dad called. I hesitated before answering, unsure if I was ready for another confrontation. But when I picked up, his voice wasn't defensive or angry. It was soft, almost hesitant. "Alex," he began, "I owe you an apology." I stayed quiet, letting him continue. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he admitted. "You're right, we handled this all wrong. From the fun to the trip to the way we've treated you, I can't tell you how sorry I am. We never meant to hurt you, but that doesn't excuse what we did. We want to make it right," he continued. "We want you to be part of things moving forward. No more secrets. No more leaving you out. You're just as much a part of this family as anyone else." I took a deep breath, trying to process his words. They sounded good, but after years of feeling like an outsider, I wasn't ready to forgive so easily. "Dad," I said carefully, "I appreciate the apology, really, but words aren't enough. I need to see it." "I understand," he said. "We'll prove it to you. Just give us a chance." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, I saw small changes that gave me hope. Mom started calling me more, not just to chat, but to actually ask for my opinion on things that mattered. She even asked me to help her plan a family dinner, something she'd never done before. At first it felt strange, like she was trying too hard, but eventually it started to feel genuine. Jake and Emily also made an effort. Jake invited me over for a beer and a game night, something we hadn't done in years. Emily started texting me randomly, sharing funny memes and asking how my day was going. These weren't grand gestures, but they were steps in the right direction. Despite these changes, the Italy trip loomed in the background like a shadow I couldn't ignore. I knew they wanted me to come, even if they hadn't said it outright. But as the trip approached, I realized I wasn't ready. Not yet. One evening, Mom called to check in. After a few minutes of small talk, she hesitantly brought up the trip. "You know, Alex," she said, "we'd love for you to join us. It wouldn't be the same without you." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Mom, I appreciate that, but I've decided not to go." Her silence was palpable. "Oh," she finally said. "May I ask why?" "It's not because I'm angry," I explained. "It's because I want to be part of plans from the beginning, not added in as an afterthought. This trip was planned without me, and that's hard to forget. Maybe next time, when we plan something together from the start, I'll feel differently." Her voice was thick with emotion when she replied, "I understand, sweetie, I really do, and I promise there will be a next time, and you'll be part of it from the very beginning." That conversation marked a turning point for me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly being heard. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild my relationship with my family. Slowly, cautiously, but with purpose. I set clear boundaries, telling them that I wouldn't tolerate being excluded or treated like an afterthought anymore. To my surprise, they respected those boundaries. Mom started looping me into family discussions, even about things as small as what to cook for Sunday dinner. Jake and Emily made a point of including me in casual get-togethers, like watching a game or grabbing coffee. And Dad stopped brushing things off. He started asking me how I felt about things, a small gesture that meant more than he probably realized. I wasn't naive enough to think everything would be perfect moving forward. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of the family, not just in name but in practice. Looking back, the experience taught me a lot about myself. I realized that I'd spent years staying quiet, accepting less than I deserved because I didn't want to rock the boat. But standing up for myself didn't ruin my family. It forced us to confront the things we'd all been ignoring. As for the Italy trip, I don't regret skipping it. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about making a point. I needed them to see that I deserved more than a last-minute invitation. I deserved to be included from the start. And now, I finally feel like they see that too.